Welcome to the Attorney Post, your source for inside baseball talk about the legal field with the top attorneys in the country. Here's your host, Justin West.
All right, and I think that we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with lawyers who are at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as always, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. I am very pleased today to have with me Eric Toscano. Eric runs the Tenant Law Group out there in San Francisco. It is actually the largest tenants' rights law group in all of the state of California. And we'll be talking a lot today about what he does to help his clients. So you can visit his website online at Tenant Law Group Tenant Law Group SF.com. SF as in San Francisco, I believe.
Yes.
As always, we will have a link down in the show notes below, so please feel free to follow that. Again, that's tenantlawgroupsf.com. As always, we're going to read from one of our sponsors first. Our first sponsor today is injuryattorneyleads.com. If you are an injury attorney, you know that you can spend a lot of money pursuing leads. The average lead can cost anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to get a qualified person, even to fill out a form. And then usually it takes 5 to 10 people in order to get one of those to turn into an actual client who is willing to work with you. Most companies out there that sell leads for insurance, or rather leads for injury attorneys, they work on a basis where people come by their site, fill out a form, and they send it to you. They charge you that, and that's basically it. That's where they stop. But with injury attorney leads, that's where they begin. Injuryattorneyleads.com has people reaching out to them all across the country. Once they fill out that form, Injury Attorney Leads reaches out to those people and re-verifies their information before live transferring that call to your law firm directly to you with a recorded call. These are only people who have been in an accident and who want to talk to a lawyer about their case. So you can be sure that these potential clients meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and the close rates average around 60%. Set up a time to speak with a client generation specialist by visiting injuryattorneyleads.com and scheduling a time to talk. That's injuryattorneyleads.com. All right. And now I am joined with Eric Toscano, who's got a great Italian name. And if I understand correctly, he's quite fluent in Italian as well. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I spent 3 years over there and studied it in college as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Eric is the CEO and managing attorney of the Tenant Law Group out there in San Francisco. As I said before, it is the largest tenants' rights firm in all of the state of California. They help California renters who've been harassed, discriminated against, or forced to endure in uninhabitable living conditions, as well as recover money for their losses. He's got his bachelor's in economics from Stanford and his law degree from UC Davis, or US Davis, UC Davis. UC Davis. I think I have a typo there. He dedicates 100% of his practice to tenants' rights. He was awarded the top 40 under 40 litigation attorneys in 2016 and was honored as a Northern California Rising Star by Super Lawyers as well. He served on the board of directors for the Eviction Defense Collaborative in San Francisco, and he currently serves on UC Davis's school law alumni board of directors as well. So question number one that I've got for you, Eric, as always, is what did I miss?
Well, thank you Justin. Thanks for having me on your show. Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. I think one of the things we're most proud of is in the last 2 years, we've been recognized in our first 2 years of eligibility, Tenant Law Group, as one of the fastest growing law firms in the United States. In 2019, we were ranked the 22nd, and in 2020, we were ranked 12th, the 12th fastest growing law firm in the United States. The reason I'm really proud of that statistic is, the size of our firm, the growth that we continue means that we're able to help that many more people. We have the size and the capacity to be able to reach that many more people. And we just literally this week are in the process of opening a Southern California office as well to complement our San Francisco office, so that we really do have the reach throughout the state of California. I guess the only other thing I'll add is today, actually this week, we started onboarding for the first time a managing attorney. So I will separate myself from the provision of legal services within our firm and focus exclusively on the management side of it, which is my desire, something I've always wanted to do. But I think those are the only other things I'd add.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's always great to work with anybody who's working with a growing and thriving practice, because that means that what you're doing is working. It's working well. You're representing your clients. You're taking care of them. And that's always for me a sign of trust. I know that if an attorney's firm is growing, that they're almost certainly doing something right. So that's great. So Eric, what got you into tenant law? Like there's a lot of sexy fields in law, and I feel like tenant law doesn't feel very sexy. It's not your high powered litigation. At least it doesn't feel like it's going to be. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of a backstory there, or just it's an area that you found there was a need that you could really fill. So what got you into tenant law in the first place?
It's interesting. I went into law school. I'm a 2009 law school graduate. When I went into it, I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I thought courtroom advocacy sounded pretty cool. I definitely wanted to be representing people or individuals. And what happens throughout your or at least my experience in law school was you kind of get sucked into everyone else kind of heading towards, oh, we want to go work for one of these big firms. It's great experience. Pays pretty well. We all had our law school loans, and so I just ended up training in that direction. And I think I kind of got pulled aside from my path of what I really went to law school for, which was to help people. And just by way of a brief backstory, what got me interested in law in the first place was when I was living in Italy. This is the early 2000s. I started up a small business called Italian Citizenship and Genealogy Services. So what I would do is basically I had just become recognized as a dual citizen. So I hold two citizenships. I'm a US citizen and an Italian citizen. And I found there were like no resources online to explain to people with Italian ancestry how to go throughout this process. Some of the things they would need for this were certificates from the various, civil vital records offices in Italy, and they also needed translations. So my website offered advice, services, and translations as well too, and would help people track down documents. So working with all those people, taking this archaic Italian law, explaining it to people really was my driving force to get me interested in the law. And anyway, that's what got me to law school. So I wanted to continue. So I sort of had, the foundation for wanting to have my own business, wanting to represent people, wanting to do some good in the world, make a difference on a little bit of a larger scale if possible. So anyway, I go through the process of law school. I kind of get pulled away. I ended up starting my career working in a big firm. I was doing intellectual property litigation, mostly patent litigation defense, which were big companies where our clients were in-house counsel, our clients were corporations. And it just, really from the fit of working in that big firm environment didn't really work well. I never really caught on to that,
right?
Nor the client base. It never really spoke to what I wanted to do in the law. So what happened was I was there for about 2.5 years. I left without I was actually considering leaving the law. And I had one pro bono client I was working with, and I was doing some landlord tenant counsel for them. And when I left, I told them, it's been a pleasure working with you. And they said, well, sorry to see you go. We've really enjoyed working with you as well too. Would you consider continuing to work for us if we paid you? And I said, sure, why not? I mean, I don't have a job. I have nothing else lined up. So that was my first client. And I think I remember like putting on word letterhead, Eric Toscano, ESQ. I mean, I'm like a third year lawyer who I don't really have no practical skills to offer the general public, right? I mean, how many bet the company cases who've just been sued for patent infringement are going to come to a third year? The answer is no one. So I really had no marketable skills. So I was what I ended up doing is that led to me saying, oh, this is actually kind of cool, handling a few different clients. Mm-hmm. So I hung a shingle in late 2012, and that firm was called Toscano Law. And I was, it's funny, I joke now, but what my practice was door law, which really was whatever comes through the door. That's my practice area, which for two reasons is bad. One, it makes it really difficult to market. Toscano is not equivalent with, it's not like a name that you would associate with anything. And secondly, the whole jack of all trades, master of none. You really want to focus, you want to be able to just be an expert. And so that came a little bit later on. But I had a few landlord tenant cases. I did some on behalf of landlord, some on behalf of tenant. Said, I feel like I'm more on the tenant side. But really what that opened my eyes to for the first time, and so now this is 2013, was this whole concept of plaintiffs work, which was great. I loved the whole idea, consistent with like what really got me inspired to want to work in the law in the first place. of being able to, take a client with a really bad, or a person who's just undergone some really horrific situation or scenario and been injured in some way, maybe not physically, but has suffered some legal injury and could go to a lawyer. The lawyer does their assessment, and then I'll take your case. Don't owe me anything. One of the first clients, landlord tenant clients, where I was representing the tenant in contingency, I think it was the second lawsuit I ever filed on behalf of a plaintiff, was a lovely single mother. She had 3 sons. She was an immigrant, lives in San Francisco, and she had a sewage leak. One day she comes home and there's raw sewage coming out of her sink. She's got a baby. She's got a baby less than a year old. And, this woman who's, working her butt off for, her 3 sons, and, recently arrived. She calls her property manager, no answer, nothing. She ends up doing is basically sopping up raw sewage in her house on her own with paper towels, like looking after her 2 kids. Her baby child ends up getting a skin rash. It's just terrible. Basically what happens is continues to call. There's spotty electricity. It's just this horrible situation. She ends up just like walking out and like just basically saying, I'm done in, after about 4 months of this. But, in the meanwhile, they're living in this filthy condition with this like raw sewage stench. That's the first case. And I ended up getting her, what now, I just wish I would have that case again now, because I feel like I could do such a better job for her. But we were successful in getting her, I was successful in getting her a recovery. And I realized this is great. I mean, this feels good. It's something I know I can do. And in San Francisco, it's the San Francisco City Rent Ordinance that actually is very one-sided in that it favors tenants, that allows for triple damages plus attorney's fees. Triple damages means you calculate them and you just multiply it by 3. You can recover attorney's fees and costs, and basically it makes it very favorable. And these cases can resolve for pretty significant amounts. So, long answer to your question. I really enjoyed doing that. End of 2013, I ended up partnering with 2 other attorneys. I was in a partnership for a couple of years, and we just picked 3 practice areas. Now we're basically a full-fledged plaintiffs firm doing personal injury, tenant rights law, and business litigation. And again, I kept coming back. Business litigation is really general. Personal injury, there's gazillions of attorneys doing it. This tenant rights thing is pretty fun, though. I really like it. It's not a field that's occupied by a lot of attorneys.
Yeah.
People who are there are very passionate about what they do. It checks off all the boxes, which is kind of what inspires me to want to do the work. And if you think about the market, 45% of Californians are renters, ballpark. And there's I think 38 or 39 million of us right now, which breaks down to 17, 18 million renters.
Yeah.
There's a huge market out there. So I saw a lot of opportunity, and we can do some good for people. And so here we are, several years later, and now doing tenant rights law.
That's awesome. And you're really helping people that need help. That, especially the case like that mother. I mean, I was a single child of only child of a single mom, however that works out. And so anytime I hear, about a single mom just doing her best to make a way, and it's all these stupid things get in the way that are frustrations, especially raw sewage and whatnot. It's disgusting. So that's awesome. So let me ask you this, and I think all of our listeners will take this with a grain of salt when I say this. There's homeowners and there's renters, and people who are renters tend to have less capital. They tend to have less equity. It's just a fact, because once you have a home, you've got something that you're putting your money into. It's building equity for you. So people who rent tend to not have as much money. So let me ask you a question on behalf of those people listening who maybe think they can't afford an attorney, even if they think they have a bad situation. How do you work with people who maybe don't have a large budget and don't think that they could afford regular attorney rates?
It's a great question. And this is one of the first things, people ask us, I'm just a renter. I know I have this bad situation. I don't know if I can afford to have an attorney. And in fact, most of our clients have never worked with an attorney before. So as plaintiffs' attorneys, we work on a contingency fee basis, which means we're not asking for an upfront fee. We're just, what we commit to is, if we are successful, we will take a percentage of the recovery, and we will build in, we'll estimate all of our costs. And some of these cases can take a year, 2 years, 3 years. We will just build that into a fixed percentage of what we can recover for you. And I believe we have a 100% success rate in recovering money damages for our clients in lawsuits, tenant rights lawsuits that we filed in this firm. I think that is, I believe that's there. If I'm off, I'm only off by maybe one case, but I'm pretty sure it's 100% at this point.
Wow.
I don't want to say anything. So yeah, so I mean, if we've taken your case and we're going to file that complaint, we're pretty sure we're going to be able to get a recovery of some amount for you. So you don't owe us a fee, and if we're unsuccessful, like, you don't owe us anything. We've tried to make it as easy as possible for a client to hire our firm. And the other thing I want to mention is, there's only a certain percentage, there has to be some boxes that need to get checked in order for it to be economically feasible for us to continue operating and, paying our amazing team their salaries and paying the overhead associated with the law firm. And unfortunately, not all cases meet those criteria. So what we also have is an advice attorney service for people that just have questions or maybe want to handle some matters on their own. And so the other big service that we offer is, people can hire us. We've categorized them into 3 different types of attorney consultations. We call them silver, gold, and platinum. Silver is 30 minutes, gold is 60 minutes, and platinum is 60 minutes plus a written summary, any sort of ghost written correspondence on behalf of the client to the landlord to try to resolve, but really an explanation of the law. And people have responded really well to that. You can just go on our website and book a time to talk to an attorney, and it's for a fee. But we do offer all clients free case evaluations. We have free resources to download on our website. We have free videos to review. And then if we can take the case on contingency, we also obviously can represent you, obviously for no money out of pocket, I should say. There is a fee associated with it, but right. It will be till the end. So for the most part, and most of, other than the paid attorney consultations, we don't generally we don't ask for an upfront cost for our contingency cases.
Okay. And there's always a free consultation. So if people just want to know if they even have a case or if they have a right, they can pick up the phone and give you a call or schedule online. Is that correct?
That's right. We'll do a free case evaluation.
Free case evaluation.
So we'll consider the case. Yeah, I mean, we refer to the attorney advice as an actual attorney consultation. So that is also available.
That's a fair distinction to make.
Yeah. So we have free case evaluations, and then we also offer attorney consultations for free.
Gotcha. And people listening, you can also call 415-915-7445 to speak to the Tenant Law Group. I saw some pretty amazing victories down here as well. And I was looking around. Obviously, people don't go into this because they want to make a lot of money, but people do have the right to compensation. I'm seeing, damages and settlements around $500,000 or so. How bad does the situation have to get for an award? And I'm guessing that's multiplied by 3, damages times 3 or something. But even still, how bad does the situation have to get for an award like that?
So what makes a strong tenant rights case, and I'll give you an example too. What makes a strong tenant rights case is where you have and I think this probably is true of many plaintiffs' firms, is you really want a sympathetic, someone who's trying to just live and not, when I say sympathetic, I mean, someone who hasn't engaged and hasn't instigated a lot of the issues that resulted in the conflict with the landlord, but just going about living their life.
Right.
And on the other side, you have a landlord who has engaged in some behavior that is either fraudulent or intentional or grossly negligent, some really bad stuff. So let me translate that into plain English. Some good cases for us, I should say, a strong tenant rights case for a tenant who would come to us would be the type of case where a landlord had evicted a tenant in California now, since early 2020, across the state. There must be good cause to evict a tenant. And good cause, is for the things that you would imagine, not paying rent or causing harm to other tenants, or the owner wants to reclaim the property to move in for him or herself, or the landlord wants to get out of the rental market entirely. That's called an Ellis Act eviction. So if a landlord tries to evict a tenant, particularly in a really coveted rent-controlled unit in San Francisco, where I think I saw something yesterday that average rents are still $2,600 for a 1-bedroom in San Francisco. Wow. And let's say you've got a tenant paying, been in there for 30 years, paying $1,000 of rent. The landlord really wants them out, so they'll do an owner move-in eviction, which is procedurally proper. All the papers, are served proper, but then the landlord never moves in. The tenant moves out. The landlord does some renovation work, and 2 weeks later, it's up on Airbnb. That's a fraudulent owner move-in eviction. That would be a big case. Any case involving where the tenant suffered some sort of, bed bug bites, or we've had cases involving a lot of respiratory issues related to the environment from old buildings, that, like a lot of toxic mold, those kinds of cases. But I like to give an example because people are, I can't understand, why these would be big cases. So let's use an example of a family that's living in the Mission District in San Francisco. Let's go with that $1,000 a month renter who is suffering from that, who received a fraudulent owner move-in eviction. Okay, they've been good renters. They pay their rent on time. They're in San Francisco. There's been rent control for a while. They pay $1,000 of rent, and this is a family that's, I say most of our clients haven't had attorneys before. A lot of them are blue collars. A lot of them are immigrants. A lot of them are senior citizens, individuals with disabilities. Anyway, so they're there. They're paying $1,000 of rent. They couldn't afford the market rates around nearby. The landlord gives them a procedurally proper owner move-in eviction. That's one half of what we see. The other half of what we see is like there's a rodent infestation, I don't know, like a bed bug infestation or some other really awful, or a situation like that client I told you about where there's like a plumbing explosion. Yeah. And the landlord doesn't respond or doesn't address the issue, and the unit becomes uninhabitable. Literally, you don't have electricity, you don't have, and the landlord, whether through intentionally or negligently, whatever, for whatever reason, the repairs don't get made, the tenant moves out. That's what's known as a constructive eviction. Those are also fall into the same category, but that depends on how egregious the facts are. But if you've got like a fraudulent act, that's even a stronger case. So anyway, let's go back to the scenario. You've got your tenant who's paying $1,000 a month. And let's just, to make the math easy, say that the fair market value, the landlord wants to put it on Airbnb or wants to put it on, put it on Craigslist for $3,000 a month. And I'm using this to make the math easy.
Right.
So California law says that difference between the fair market value and what the tenant was paying at the time they were forced to move out, that $2,000 differential, if it's an illegal eviction, that inures to the benefit of the tenant. That component of damages flows with the tenant. That belongs to the tenant. So let's take that scenario. They lived there 20 years, and let's say we can credibly, there's evidence, the clients will say they had no plans to move. So let's just take 10 years to make the math easy. Okay. Damages in California would be calculated as follows. The clients wanted to live there for 10 more years. There's a $2,000, the term we call is a rent differential or loss of use. And 2,000 times 12 is 24,000. Yeah. Times 10 years is 240,000. Wow. In San Francisco, that gets trebled. And also in some other jurisdictions. In Oakland, it gets trebled. In some cases in San Jose, it gets, in some cases in other jurisdictions throughout the state too, it will get tripled. So that $240,000 case is now a $720,000 case. You add in attorney's fees and costs, and some of these you calculate total damages at over $1 million. And that's how you end up with results like that. Each case is unique. And the point I always like to make is, that is just an illustrative case. It's not, not all cases meet those criteria. Each case is evaluated on its own merits. And so, I would ask, I ask anyone who comes, well, geez, you got this for this person. So this is, each case is different. But one fact that we are very proud of is if you average out all the net recoveries to the clients over, I think since January, and we do some cases through litigation, and we do some without filing a lawsuit. We call those sometimes pre-litigation. And the pre-litigation ones don't have a 100% success rate. But averaged in, the blended, since January of 2020, we have about an 83% success rate blended, and an average net recovery, that is dollars in pockets, of over $22,000 per tenant. Wow. So it's like those are just the statistics, and something we're really proud of, and we include that in some of our promotional materials because it's factual, and therefore we can state truthful statements in our advertising.
Oh, I think that's totally fair. So I got a question again. It's just something that was kind of bugging me. I don't want to give ideas to the people that would abuse this situation, obviously, but now I'm just really curious. So in the scenario where the landlord says, well, I want to use this for personal occupancy, so that the renter, landlord occupancy eviction, whatever you called that a second ago, is there some sort of a a statute of limitations on how long they have to live there in order to show that they actually wanted to live there. So for instance, could the landlord move in for 3 weeks and be like, oh, this isn't working, I'm going to move out now. Oops, sorry that you're gone, but now that it's on the market, I can rent it. Or is there a level of showing that that is fraudulent, or how would that play out, if that makes sense?
No, it's a great question. So it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I'm on the spot right now, so I want to make sure I get this right. And San Francisco is always tweaking its rent ordinance. But last I checked, it was the landlord needed to be in the property for 3 months. And I just, I want to make sure I double check. I would actually be checking this in real time just to be 100% certain, and live there for 3 years. So, if the landlord moved in and was there within 3 months, but then moves out after 6 months, that would be fraudulent. They didn't meet the minimum requirements. And, the argument I would make was that was just a pretense to get the tenants, these low rent paying tenants out. So, the short answer is it really depends on the jurisdiction. And with the caveat that, I would want to just double check that the information I just shared with you for San Francisco. But yes, the jurisdictions generally have a minimum must live there requirement, must move in by this date requirement, and must stay there this long requirement.
Gotcha. I hit my mute button there. So a circumstance like that happened about a decade ago to me and my family, and we were renting a house for a year and a half. We planned to be there for a good long while. And the landlord, his daughter wanted the house, and we'd just gotten back traveling across the country. My wife's from Pennsylvania, and we had gotten in at 3, 4 in the morning, bleary eyed, because we travel at night with our kids, and 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, there's a knock at the door, and it's the landlord, and he's got this pallid look on his face, and we were always very congenial. He was a friendly guy in general. He's like, well, I got some bad news, Justin. I'm gonna have to kick you out by the end of the month. And his daughter, the house was actually kind of run down. It wasn't a great house, and I think within like 6 months she was out of there. So I'm not expecting any sort of, and he's passed on anyway. I have no ill will towards the man, and we wound up in a better situation. So I always look at things from as optimistic of a perspective as I can, but it's something that at least at the time was a major stressor in our lives. And so anyone else that finds themselves in this scenario, I just, I want them to know that they've got rights, and that they can get, again, at least a free case evaluation. I think that's very, very important, to be able to know that you've got rights, to talk to an attorney who's competent, who's skilled in this area. So anyway, I'm just kind of talking because that's what I do.
Good. I would like to add there, because it's a great point. Since we're on the subject of letting people know what their rights are, I mean, if you've been in a unit less than a year, California law says landlord really only has to give you 30 days. And when we counsel tenants, if a tenant's planning on moving out, and if I were ever counseling landlords, and I should clarify, we don't ever represent landlords, we only represent tenants, I would say, give your tenants as much time as possible. There's no harm in giving, the minimum, if they're less than a year, is 30 days. Give them more time. People need time to, get their lives in order. It's a big move. And if it's unexpected, the more notice you can give, the better. If they've been there longer than a year, the law says you must give 60 days notice as well, too. So in a scenario like yours, if you were in California and the landlord says, I need you out by the end of the month, and they're there, day 15, and I need you out by 30, they can't do that. I mean, you could literally just ignore that, because the landlord could not enforce that in California.
Gotcha. Right, unfortunately, I'm in Kansas, so it wouldn't really matter, but that's all right. So here's another question I've got for you, because I know that there's been a lot of issues that have come up. And I talk to a lot of attorneys about COVID and how it affects their practice, and moving to a more digital practice in general, which I'm happy to talk about. But I know that a lot of the people you probably represent have also faced issues with income and, not being able to pay rent because their job is shut down or something like that. What is COVID meant to you, and what has it meant to your clients, and how you practice law and protect them?
Yeah, so I think I'll just focus on the California specific legislation. So, the interesting thing, and I probably should have led with this when I'm talking about San Francisco having this, and Oakland having this, and California having this. So each state generally handles, there's some federal legislation, but we almost exclusively operate. And I should say that we're a California only firm right now. All our attorneys are licensed only in California. So unfortunately, if there's anyone listening in Nevada, feel free to reach out, but we'd have to make a referral out of state. But within California, the California legislature controls most of the law. I mean, obviously, the statewide laws, most of the laws that we deal with are statewide laws. There are some federal laws relating to tenancy. Usually it's exclusive to, federally owned land or federal subsidies. Like there's a Section 8 program for low-income tenants, and I believe that's nationwide. I think it's nationwide, but some of those cases could be heard in federal court. We operate almost exclusively in state court because we're dealing with California-specific state laws. Now, those laws apply to all Californians. Cities can enact more stringent protective laws on behalf of tenants, and they're called ordinances, for anyone listening. So when I'm referring to a city rent ordinance, it's a city rent law where, and these tend to be in population areas throughout the state that there's a lot of people that want to live there. So there's a high population density. And so there is more demand than there is supply for housing. So that, the regular functioning of markets don't work in a way that would allow people from limited means, the kind of people you would want, like in a city like San Francisco, the artists, the teachers, the firefighters, to be able to afford living there. I've seen different analyses made of these, but if the free market were to work on its own, rents would, for a new unit would across the board, I think you'd see more economically homogenous neighborhoods in the areas. So some cities have made conscious decisions. In San Francisco, they enacted their rent ordinance in June of 1979. So it's been around for, 42 years, almost coming up on the anniversary, to only allow landlords to increase rents. And that, this rent ordinance has undergone various modifications over the years, but by a specific amount per year. They established a rent board that would, handle some disputes, and they also established this you have to have a good cause to evict a tenant. And so for a long time, these existed in various cities throughout the state: San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, Los Angeles. Now I think we were actually in the middle of doing an inventory, but they're adding new cities pop up with their rent ordinances all the time.
Right.
I think there's somewhere between 25 and 35 right now, last time we checked. So anyway, there's this second level of protections. So when COVID rolled around, to answer your question, cities enacted in San Francisco, predictably, they have very strong tenant rights, culture, had enacted some protections. Oakland had enacted some protections, and eventually some version of these were enacted statewide. What ended up happening is if someone suffered an economic loss related to COVID, the state was saying, landlords, unless there's a health and safety issue for your other tenants, you cannot evict those tenants while the pandemic is going on, because there was also a public health interest in keeping these people housed. Obviously, you have more people on the streets, more people unhoused, it's going to promote further spread of the coronavirus. So where we're at right now is, and this is going to be the basis for we're going to hopefully do some webinars on this. I'm working with our marketing team on this to help educate California tenants about this. But at the end of June, in order to avoid an eviction, because up till now, there's been, a debt accruing for some tenants, but no eviction resulting from it. If you pay 25% of any rent due, I think since January, if that's all paid up, no eviction. Okay. If it's not, landlords can start evicting you, I believe by the end of June. And I think that they're actually going to start processing the eviction cases. I think it's August 1st. Anyway, July 31st. But anyway, it's June or July. But, so you can see, I need to have all the data right in front of me so I can
That's all right.
get accurate information. But
as a reminder to all of our listeners, this show is for informational purposes only. This does not constitute legal advice. As always, please make sure to consult with an attorney if you have any legal issues, et cetera, et cetera. There's our disclaimer. Y'all heard it. All right.
I appreciate that. So when I'm presenting the webinar, I'll have all the data right in front of me. I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff. The bottom line is some protections that currently exist will expire for renters. And we just want to make sure that as many people as possible are aware of those rights. So, I mean, that's it. I think, generally, my perspective, I think California has done a great job, and some of the, cities have done excellent jobs of protecting tenants. And I recognize, it's difficult. My heart really goes out for the mom and pop landlords too, who through no fault of their own, they've got mortgages. Sometimes they've got mortgages to pay as well too. And so I think that California's tried to strike a nice balance between protecting, smaller landlords and property owners, and of course, making sure people stay housed and dealing with the economic realities of the pandemic and the job losses.
Yeah, it's hard to remember that sometimes, but most landlords are good people. Most landlords are there they are just making a living, an honest living like everyone else. So I think that's definitely important. So here in a minute, I'm going to ask the question I always ask people, and it allows us to get to know you a little bit more deeply, because failure is a good teacher, and I think we even talked about this a little bit in the pre-discussion. So I'm going to ask you here in a minute what one of your biggest failures is and what it taught you. And of course, I also would love to know one of your biggest successes, though you've already shared a number of really great success stories with us. But first, I'm going to go over and read from our second sponsor here. But first, of course, as always, we'll look at your website again. Great testimonials on here as well. If you guys go to visit tenantlawgroupsf.com, you can see some great testimonials, great success stories, lots of 5-star reviews, and everything else. Our second sponsor today is Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers. Are you a business owner who knows that being on page 1 of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with an SEO company because you know that SEO is both really expensive and also oftentimes very slow to act? Well, not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page 1 of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. Rocket SEO utilizes national news media campaigns across a gamut of different news sites that rank you instantly in the search results. You can boost your website's ranking in Google in 1 week or less with a simple system that leverages the power of major media companies and network affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS News, and Fox, as well as locals like the Boston Herald, the Sacramento Bee, and all stops in between. You can boost yourself to page 1 of Google in under a week, oftentimes 2 or 3 times on page 1, oftentimes for dozens of keywords, all in one simple campaign. To learn more, visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. That's hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. All right. And we'll come back here. So, Eric, tell me, I know that you seem to have almost 100% success rate. There's a lot of win there. There's a lot of success, and that's great. But I'm sure, especially early on, there were a few times that things didn't quite pan out the way that you thought. So what is something that didn't go right? I don't even like the word failure sometimes, but what is something that, well, I'll say it anyway. What's a fail that you've experienced in your career as an attorney? And what did it teach you? How has it shaped how you've moved forward?
I think, what comes to mind immediately was I had a very difficult time. So I started this firm in January of 2016. So we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. And
Congratulations.
Thank you. Towards the end of 2018, we had and I don't think this is uncommon for probably most law firm owners, particularly contingency attorneys, is I had a few very a few months, consecutive months in the red. And that was a very difficult period to get through. I mean, it was a failure in the sense that I should have been better prepared for it. And I think some of the causes of it were I didn't have a good grasp on what our average case value was. And I think I had overly rosy projections, and kind of, Murphy's Law, everything that went wrong with those cases. And let me be very clear, all those cases were, included one that went to trial. And I was also exhausted from a trial and, dealing with a particularly tough month. I also had some challenges. I had never been an employer before, so I was very green at the idea of both trying to delegate some of these very critical, letting go of some of the tasks of prosecuting a tenant rights case was very tough for me. And I think I didn't do it in as thoughtful a way, and more importantly, with the right controls in place and with the right people in place, to be candid as well too.
Yeah.
So I had projections that weren't right. I think not people that weren't in the right positions at the time. And the net result of that was, I think, lesser than stellar results, obviously some months in the red, and, just a lot of frustration. So that was those were some, and what I learned from that, and I appreciate you asking that question as well too, is as a law firm owner, and I think any entrepreneur, you need to know your numbers. You actually absolutely have to, inside and out, and you have to have very accurate projections. One of the, we've added, I think, 5 or 6 people to our team since January 1st of this year. And one of I think actually the one I'm going to talk about joined us in December. So one of just an amazing team member, he's now our firm accountant. He's an Excel whiz, just a numbers nerd like me, and I say that with love and respect. But he works with all of our attorneys on their projections for every single matter that you're handling for a client right now? When do you anticipate this will be resolved? What's your best projection for this? So this helps us for a couple of things. It sets the groundwork for being able to have some making sure that we're prosecuting cases quickly and efficiently and as aggressively as we can, and also targeting a certain end date so that we can make sure that we have the resources internally to make sure that the case is resolved, whether by way of settlement or judgment, for the highest amount possible. And really that's what we're out to do for the clients. And I think in terms of personnel, and I think a lot of attorneys deal with this too. I had never, up until January of 2019, so this is year 16, 17, 18, now we're in 2019, ever had to let an employee go for non-performance. And I think and I realized that our clients at the end of the day were the ones that were suffering from people who weren't doing their jobs in their roles. So we actually had 2019 was just a hugely, it was a huge growth year, both in terms of, size of the firm, but just in terms of number of people that we had on the team. And that's also the year I brought in our chief she was then our professional legal administrator. She's now our chief operating officer, Nicole. And she really just, helped really make sure that we had this great culture. Oh, and one thing you asked about at the beginning, if you left anything out, we were certified last week as a great place to work, which is great. We're really proud of that. We have, thank you. I think it's something like a percentage of, we have 100% of our employees that say Tenant Law Group is a great place to work. And I think the average for company is 59%. So if you go on the Great Place to Work website, we're about to, literally, it's so fresh. We haven't even included this in our marketing materials. It's not up on our website yet. But anyway, my point through all this is what I learned is you got to know your numbers. And you can't deliver great results for your client if you don't have a strong, healthy law firm business that is, consistently making sure that, it's running smoothly and that you have the right people in the right seats to be able to deliver the best results possible for your clients. So that was my takeaway from that experience. And so, I think it's only a failure if you take nothing away from it. If you don't learn the lesson, then it's just an opportunity to build, grow, course correct, and make improvements. So
I think that's actually why I asked the question the way I usually do, and why I incorporate it in the first place is, failures are only failures if you don't take something away from it, if you don't grow from it. Obviously, if you just take it as a loss and you go home sulking, then that was a failure. But most failures have a lesson to teach, and sometimes the lesson is far more valuable than success, because if you keep doing things the way you were doing them before, you'll never see the level of success you could see if you do in fact learn from those failures. So I think that's a great way to put it, and I think that's exactly kind of the spirit of that question. Well, let's put the shoe on the other foot, so to speak. Tell me about one of your most favorite successes that you've had, Eric.
I think it also ties,
other than landing your beautiful wife, I'm sure, right?
Oh yes, right, of course. AKA firm photographer and senior advisor too. So she's been with me every step of the way. I should say, I'll give a shout out to my wife Stephanie too. We met in law school, and from the early days when it was just me and I think I had a remote legal assistant. No, I was just me and a remote legal assistant from the beginning, and Stephanie sort of in a supporting role. So she wore many different hats. So as a licensed attorney in California, she stepped in and helped, draft, rolled her sleeves up and did a lot of work. And throughout this time too, she's also been a mom. We had we're parents of two children. So we had our first son in 2015, and our second was a pandemic baby born last July. So anyway, she's doing all this while also, being the primary caretaker for our sons. But anyway, the biggest success I think is also on the team that we have now. I mean, it is, I can't underscore enough like how important it is to have the right people in the right seats. And I think that's a combination of having a really outstanding culture, which I attribute to our COO, Nicole. She's done a great job. But part of this also is, and this sort of began before the pandemic, but we are a fully distributed team permanently. So when people talk about, boy, can't wait to go back in the office, it's just that will never happen. We do have conference space that we can use as needed for depositions, for prep, to meet with clients as needed. But on a day-to-day basis, what we found is, let me step back a little bit. it's it's that formative year, 2019. I made a decision that year. We're in San Francisco, rent's super expensive. We've got like a negative, like a zero unemployment rate. So we're literally trying to recruit support staff from like out, like in the, an hour drive away.
Yeah.
So it just makes it really, and people are showing up, and I mean, no one wants to commute 2 hours. So I'm like, there's got to be a better way around this. Why don't we see if we can just start transitioning to a virtual thing? I mean, this may have benefits, who knows? I wasn't thinking there would be a pandemic coming in about 6 months, but so what we started doing is we started, our new hires beginning around I think we had our first remote employee in July of, well, no, that's not true. We actually had my first remote employee was my legal assistant. So really from the beginning, early days, but what we started doing is we started utilizing a company that focuses on filling administrative positions with overseas fully remote workers who speak English. So we hired our first remote, and we refer to them, they call them staffers. So we had our first staffer in July, and that was an intake support position in July of 2019. We haven't looked back. We have 13 team members right now, are staffers, and utilizing it, we have them involved in marketing, accounting, a legal assistant, administrative support, a lot of in intake. And what ended up happening, between mid 2019 and then I will just say really the start of the pandemic, March of 2020, was we were downsizing our space. We were making all of our hires remote, and also in California, whether employees, we have all of our team members are now remote. And what I found was morale is up because people aren't wasting any of their life stuck in a commute, which is not just time consuming and miserable, but also there's expenses, there's parking, there's gas, there's, tolls. And so there's a savings to that as well too. And in California, what we also do is we also reimburse. Not only do people not have to spend money on that, we offer a reimbursement to our employees for the business use of their home office space. And we can also provide them with, if they're going to use their, we'll provide them with their computing equipment to make sure, everything's secure. But so working from home, they get paid a little more just to do that for the use of their home office space. So employees are happier. People, the X factor that wasn't quite in place before the pandemic hit was, our tenants going to really become, people are going to want to come in and, give us their papers. Sometimes we're dealing with, senior citizens who may not be as comfortable or as tech savvy, not all, but some may not be as tech savvy. Some of our recent immigrants may not be as comfortable, engaging virtually. They may want to come in and see us face to face. But Zoom, but the pandemic sort of changed all that. Now everyone Zooms and people are generally comfortable. It's an acceptable way of conducting business. And it has been hugely beneficial for us too, because now we truly can have, and there's been some changes to the California, I don't want to bore your listeners with, but to civil procedure code that makes it actually easier for us to do remote depositions, easier for us to get papers over to opposing counsel. You can now do it all via email, whereas you needed permission. It was able to be done before, but it's a lot easier to do now. So we've transitioned to a fully virtual firm. And when I say fully virtual, I mean, we don't have a home office. There's no tenant law group. You're not going to go to a building and see that. We do have a principal office where we receive mail, we can receive service, we can meet with clients. We only use it as needed. It's used as needed on a day-to-day basis. All of our team members are spread throughout California. We have a team member in Texas. We now have team members throughout Central and South America. And so I think that's our biggest success, has been going virtual, and in so doing, increasing the morale of our team, having people more focused, not on a commute or, frazzled from a commute, but just they wake up and they are focused on our clients' work. Eliminating paper has allowed things, believe it or not, has forced us to become a lot more, I think it has helped us to better track everything, because now everything's digital. There's a digital footprint and a stamp for everything. So this whole process has just been hugely successful in terms of, I think making our business stronger, allowing us to have a full state reach from, the Oregon border down to Mexico. And, now like with a second location in Los Angeles, I think we'll really be able to help out the millions of LA area tenants who need help, especially with all the sorts of potential shenanigans that could come up from, the protections ending for California renters and landlords engaging in self-help. When I say that, I mean, you got to move out of here now. You haven't paid your rent. That can't do that in California, or making threatening or harassing calls on a phone. And so we're expecting a lot of that to happen this summer. So we're ready.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And again, that fault, the pandemic was kind of a great big fail for the whole globe in a sense, but we definitely learned things. We took things away from it, streamlined things. One of the reasons I brought this podcast back, in fact, was because I knew lots of people were learning how to use Zoom and were far more familiar with it than they used to be. And so everyone kind of adopted new technology. So I think it's very important, A, always know your rights, B, grow from your failures. If I can get my listeners to take two things away from this, other than use the tenant law firm if you're out in California, those would be the two things I'd want everyone to take away. Well, let me ask you one final question and we can start wrapping this up. I know your time is valuable. You've got you got things to do, people to see, kids to play with, etc. I'm sure that there's frustrations you face in the practice of law. I talk to a lot of attorneys who's like, this part of law is dumb. This thing I have to deal with over here, this facet of the courtroom, this facet of this ordinance, whatever it is totally unfair, totally biased, or just a big headache, right? So if I were to give you a magic wand and you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about the law that affects you or that affects your clients, what's the one thing, Eric, that you would change?
If I had to choose one thing, and I've been thinking about this for a while, San Francisco enacted a program a couple years back, and it's called a civil right to counsel. So under the US, I believe it's the US Constitution. Yes, there's an amendment in there that I'm not pulling from. I think it might be Fifth or Sixth Amendment. Right to counsel. Basically, a defendant has a right to an attorney, right? So if they've been criminally accused, if their liberty is going to be taken away, they have the right to an attorney. That's why we have public defenders. They represent people. Now, there's no equivalent in California for civil cases for evictions. But one thing that I've found is it's very, very difficult for a tenant who can't pay their rent, who can't afford rent. The landlord is required to go through a process in California. It's an eviction lawsuit. And the tenant gets forcibly removed if they don't leave. At the end of this process, after a judgment issues, after there's something known as a writ of possession, a sheriff can go out, they can, forcibly remove a tenant, change the locks. But all this happens after a legal process that is completely foreign to a lot of people. Now, there's lots of great landlords, and my heart goes out, to both sides when there's just a tough situation where a tenant can't afford to pay the rent. And the landlord, they have to go through this process. But what we've seen a lot, especially in cities with big incentives to get tenants who are paying below market rent out, is just a frivolous notice of there was there was a case in San Francisco where there was a notice to terminate a tenancy based on a nuisance because the tenant was creating a noise based on using kitchen appliances. This is a true story. So they were trying to evict a tenant for using kitchen appliances. Tenants, I think the idea was back in the day that a tenant who didn't know their rights, who couldn't afford an attorney, would have no defense. The landlord wins on a default, gets their judgment, the tenant moves out. Great, now I've got this unit I can. So just a lot of abuse of people who can't afford. And I think that's true throughout the state. It's very difficult for tenants who are being taken advantage of in those cases. They don't have the resources to hire an attorney. And on the attorney side, it's very, very difficult for a private law firm to be able to represent these clients, even if they did have the resources, because you get served with a landlord gives you your eviction papers and says you've been sued in court, you have to make this appearance. The tenant in California has 5 days to respond, and that's they have to. So in 5 days they have to find an attorney, hire an attorney. The attorney has to prepare the response, has to file the response. It's a lot of work. It's just very difficult. I think it's the perfect opportunity for these eviction cases. The state needs to step in. So the long answer to your question is, I think there should be a civil right to counsel. San Francisco offers it for any tenants facing eviction. That is San Francisco specific. It is a service offered by the city and county of San Francisco. I think it should be statewide. I think any tenant who is facing the prospect of homelessness, who is losing, the right to have a roof over their head, I think they have their due process should be respected. They obviously have a right to hearing. They have a right to, notice, but I think they also have a right to counsel. They are, these are people predominantly who are, they don't have law degrees they almost never have law degrees, or a lot of it, they have limited education. Sometimes they have limited knowledge of English. And I think that is a perfect place for the state to step in, because I don't think the private sector can fill that need. And I think that need definitely exists. I know it's, I'm not opining on the politics of it. I'm not opining on the cost of it. But if I had a magic wand, I would say every California tenant should have the right to eviction defense counsel.
All right.
Paid for by the state.
I think that's a noble goal or a noble wish. And I will point out one more thing. I know that you're fluent in Italian. You also do speak some Spanish and some French. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, my Italian is the best. I always joke that I think Spanish, if you know Italian, you know like 50% of Spanish.
Yeah.
And we have, 2/3 of our team are native Spanish speakers too. So I get to practice every day with them, which is great. A little bit of French. I don't use that often. But yeah, so it's fun. But we do, and I think we have this on our homepage. We have a lot of languages. I mean, I think in Nicole's, we've got Armenian, Vietnamese, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. I think there's a couple other ones in there I'm probably leaving out.
Oh, wow.
German in there too, but yes. Yeah. But for me, just Italian, English, and a little Spanish.
That's awesome. Well, Eric, do you have any parting words you'd like to leave our listeners with before we wrap up here?
I would just say, always talk to an attorney. I mean, especially if you're a tenant in California specifically, what I've always seen is a tenant who is dealing with what they might suspect is a landlord who's engaging in some shady behavior to get them out of the rent controlled unit. When they move out, the landlord, they may think to themselves, the landlord's won. The landlord has won this. I have nothing. I have no further thing. I have no further recourse, nothing. In some cases, that is the perfect time to come talk to an attorney, particularly, if it's a tenant rights case, come talk to an attorney. By moving out, if you've listened to this podcast, that loss of use, that the difference between what you were paying and the market value, that belongs to you. And if the landlord is engaging in illegal behavior to recover that rental unit, you might be able to recover something to help get you back on your feet, to help you pay for a new unit. Taking it back to the client I mentioned early on, who I represented in 2013, the single mom with 3 kids. What she told me was, when we settled her case, we got a result. She said, I can afford an apartment. I can afford an apartment for my kids now. So thank you for that. So to help get people back on their feet, if they can use this money to help house them and their families, I mean, that might be a possibility. So, don't ever give up. Talk to a law firm, one that offers a free case evaluation, at least, so you can understand if you have the kind of case that would, and if it's in California, come talk to us. We're happy to hear from you. So thank you for the forum to be able to talk to you a little bit about my firm. I really appreciate it, Justin. It's nice. I enjoyed this time with you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking the time to meet with me and to share your wisdom with all of our listeners. My name is Justin West. I've been your host today here on The Attorney Post. You can visit us online, as always, at theattorneypost.com. I've been speaking with Eric, who is, again, the founder, CEO of the Tenant Law Group. You can visit him online at tenantlaw.groupsf.com. Eric Toscano is his name. And you can also give him a call at 415-915-7445. As always, we'll have all the information in the show notes below. Until next time, remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any, and we will talk to you guys later. Thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.
Thank you.